Let me share my screen here. New York Times, actually on the 22nd of April. New York Times published 8 books for anyone curious about mindfulness or meditation. We asked experts, mindfulness teachers, spiritual leaders, and scientists for their favorite beginner-friendly titles. Beginner-friendly titles. I thought I'd share this with you. Obviously, I think there's a lot going on in the meditation, mindfulness world right now. And so just to take a look at some of the titles together. And if you download, I don't actually have a subscription to the New York Times, but I believe that you can get like 5 articles for free a month or something. Anyways, there were a couple of pertinent points here. Distractions are everywhere. We're so often summoned by smartphone notifications, emails, and other obligations that sitting still can seem like a fantasy. But research shows that meditating regularly for even a few minutes a day can reduce anxiety and help us recognize and interrupt negative thought patterns. So that's pretty interesting, right? Just a few minutes a day. We've looked at some of that research specifically. If you've been with us for long enough, we've actually, pulled out some of that research and looked at even, 2 to 5 minutes a day can actually really have effects on us. If you're interested in learning to meditate, you might look for a book. But with so many options, it's easy to reach for titles that aren't meant for beginners, said Sarah Lazar. Sarah Lazar is the director of the Lazar Lab for Meditation Research at Massachusetts General Hospital, and that is how people tend to get into trouble. Could you imagine getting into trouble meditating? So we asked half a dozen meditation experts, teachers, spiritual leaders about their favorite beginner-friendly books. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but these titles might help you cultivate a practice. Okay, so Sarah Lazar, she's at MGH. MGH is part of the Harvard Hospital system there. She was funded by the infamous Herb Benson, right? The Herb Benson Meditation Mindfulness Institute. Herb Benson was funded by John Henry, who owns the Boston Red Sox and the Liverpool Football Club in the Premier League. So he is well-funded. He has a lot of money. And he actually started the Benson Henry Institute for Mindfulness at MGH. And Herb Benson is the creator, inventor of, who knows, if you've been with me for a while. It's kind of like a pop quiz. Herb Benson is the inventor, creator of the relaxation response. Does that ring a bell? So Herb Benson is the one who in the 70s and 80s actually created the relaxation response that we've done here multiple times. And Herb Benson was funded by John Henry to start this institute at MGH. And Sarah Lazar is probably one of the premier researchers that has emerged from that institute. So that's who Sarah Lazar is. So, they're not asking Joe Schmoes in the world, even though Joe Schmoes may have a lot to say. All right, mindfulness in plain English. Straightforward and accessible guide. This is written by a Sri Lankan Buddhist monk. It's written in 1994. Imagine that. I love it when books are just so classic like that, right? Written in 1994, provides an insight. And here's the great part. It's free online. So there's a free PDF online. And so we'll actually be going through that one. Real Happiness, a 28-day program to realize the power of meditation by Sharon Salzberg. We have spoken about Sharon Salzberg many times. She has brought metta mindfulness practice or loving kindness to the Western world predominantly. She was a co-founder or one of the founding founders of the Insight Meditation Society, and has been instrumental in popularizing mindfulness in the United States. Real happy. She also provided recommendations for this list. So she's a self-selected author. Real Happiness has been popular for years and large because it's full of real-world examples that help illustrate the principles behind mindfulness. Sharon Salzberg's teaching style and communication style are very sensible, very thoughtful, said Dr. Lutz. Mindfulness for Beginners, Reclaiming the Present Moment in Your Life by Jon Kabat-Zinn. All right, we've actually destroyed this book together. In maybe 1 or 2, maybe 2 years ago. We went through this book together. We can bring that book up, but that's another good book. In Mindfulness for Beginners, Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn urges readers to challenge what he calls their current default setting, the automatic thought and reactions that govern our actions. So that's a good one, right? Challenge. What's your default setting? Before you challenge something, you obviously need to know what that something is. So, what am I challenging? I like every time I go into the supermarket that I yell at the person helping me, or I get frustrated at anybody who gets in front of me. And so you're probably not going to challenge that. But there's obviously something to bring. So we need to bring awareness to that default pathway, and we're more going to be able to challenge it if we don't like it. And so there's even the bit of like, hey, challenge it even if you do like it, right? If you're like an annoying, grumpy, malicious person, maybe paying attention to that and challenging that default pathway may be beneficial for you and others. Okay, the next one on the list, I don't think these are actually in any order. Like, this is the top one, is The Miracle of Mindfulness, an introduction to practice of meditation by Thich Nhat Hanh. So we have also dove into that one. This is probably my number one, The Miracle of Mindfulness. This is what got me on the path back in 1998 or whatever it was. Miss Salzberg recalled reading it early in her meditation years. See, even Sharon Salzberg. Here was somebody actually expressing the beauty and the magic of living with more awareness and more clarity, she said. I never really heard talked about it in those terms. So this is definitely beauty. I believe somebody actually in our group mentioned this one, Altered Traits, Science Reveals How Meditation Changes Your Mind, Brain, and Body by Daniel Goldman and Richard Davidson. We've talked about both these, but Richie Davidson. He's a professor, University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's done a lot of studies. So any of those studies that you've seen or images, you may have not seen the study, but any of the images that you've seen of like a monk on the cover of Time magazine with electrodes on their head, like they're studying monks and meditation experts. That's probably Richie Davidson and his lab in Wisconsin that have done those studies, or that were interviewed for those. This is good because it's also right. We talk about altering traits and science, how meditation actually changes your mind, brain, and body, and the altered traits. And we've looked a lot at that the classical adage, right? Repeated states caused traits. So a state that you're repeating right? Let's say you're trying to bring calm and peace. A state that you're repeating is going to become a trait, is going to become an enduring trait. So repeated state becomes enduring trait. And so ask yourself, what are the traits that I'd like to emulate, that I'd like to experience, that I'd like to express to the world, right? And then, okay, well, if that's a trait, then what are you doing? If that's a trait that you would like to express to the world or emulate yourself or feel yourself, then what are you doing on a daily basis to get to that trait? And that is about creating a repeated state as best you can, as best we can, right? But it takes time. These take time. It's not going to happen spontaneously, although it could. It's unlikely to. How to Meditate, Practical Guide to Making Friends with Your Mind by Pema Chodron. She began studying Tibetan meditation, Tibetan Buddhism in her mid-30s and became a novice Buddhist nun in 1974. Miss Salisbury recommended Pema Chodron's 1996 book, When Things Fall Apart, which she says destigmatizes states like anger, fear, sadness, and describes how to use meditation to work with them. But How to Meditate sets beginners up with mindfulness basics without overlooking the obstacles that may emerge during the process. That's a good one. Another one is 10% Happier, How I Tamed the Voice in My Head, Reduced Stress Without Losing My Edge, and Found Self-Help That Actually Works. A true story by Dan Harris. While not a How to Meditate title, this 2014 memoir speaks directly to skeptics. Mr. Harris's aha moment happened after he had an on-air panic attack on Good Morning America. He reevaluated his life and turned to meditation. He tells a very relatable story of a high-achieving person working towards self-awareness, and Mr. Davidson, one of the authors of Altered Traits. It's an accessible read for anyone beginning their meditation path. Number 8, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, Informal Talks on Zen Meditation and Practice. Shunrui Suzuki, often called Suzuki Roshi, was a Zen Buddhist monk who helped popularize Zen in the United States. It explains the basics such as posture and breathing of Zazen meditation practices in Zen Buddhism, but it should not be considered a step-by-step tutorial. Instead, this short classic, published in 1970, is packed with insightful thoughts about the philosophy behind Zen, making an argument that keeping an open mind is critical. So those are 8 books. If any one of those, we've dealt with 3, if not 2, if not 3 of them. Really good stuff there to if you're interested in getting a different perspective, reading some books. That was just published in the New York Times. In that same, so that's actually we'll do that some other day. In the same link, there's also, in that same link, there's also a link to how to practice. And a lot of those, a lot of that information is actually very good. And they have some sort of recorded meditations in there for people, all through the New York Times. And I could get them without having a subscription. So I don't know if I'm under my 4 articles a day quota or something, or a month quota. All right, so I got meditation. I got mindfulness meditation for pain relief by Jon Kabat-Zinn. All right, this was literally came out, I believe, 2 weeks ago. Okay, and so again, Jon Kabat-Zinn continues to come up. If you don't know his name, he continues to come up. He's the founder of mindfulness-based stress reduction. a lot of these people in the 70s traveled together to India, China, um, Tibet, and did a lot of studies together. Did a lot of went to ashrams and monasteries and whatnot, and tried to bring the practice to the U.S. in a way that we would be able to practice here, knowing that we wouldn't. Many of us probably wouldn't leave our families to go into a cave or something like that, or to become totally secluded. That many of us live busy lives and stuff like that. So he really founded the mindfulness based stress reduction, MBSR. And you can find, this is like a very specific class, like you can get trained in mindfulness based stress reduction. There are mindfulness based stress reduction teachers out there that are certified, and the program it's usually an 8-week program. And you can say, I went through the MBSR program. It's an 8-week program. It recommends, daily practice, et cetera, et cetera. And there's numerous studies about this program and the benefits. That's essentially Jon Kabat-Zinn. Okay. And so in essence, right, so we're here because most of us are living in pain to some degree. And, remember, the definition of pain is it's an experience that we're having. And it's due to unpleasant sensory or emotional stimuli, right? So if we think of it, right, so there's emotional pain, there's also sensory pain. The majority of us are dealing with a combination of both. It's not like we can really separate the sensory pain from the emotions, and oftentimes physical pain will cause emotional pain, and vice versa. And so they're very very linked. And believe it or not, we don't actually have there's no receptor in the body that's like a pain receptor. There's no pain receptor. There's no pain signal. The signal is your tissue is ripped, and now there's areas of your body that weren't exposed to blood that are exposed to blood, and blood can feel to some tissues like it's very almost like it's burning. There's some acid in blood, relatively speaking, and so you can have a burning sensation. When cells are open or ripped, the intracellular components of the cells go into areas that they shouldn't be in, and your body recognizes that because there are components in the cells that cause a sort of a burning sensation. So we can sense cold, right? We can sense heat. So when you put your hand on a stove, your hand doesn't sense pain. The receptors in your hand that are perceiving the senses are heat receptors. So you're going to notice, right, there's a receptor that is activated based on heat. And if it gets too much, it fires. And if those fire, it sends a response of, this is hot, right? Now, then your brain processes that, right? So your hand's saying hot, your brain processes that, and then your brain says, ouch. It's not the hand saying ouch, it's actually the brain saying ouch, actually, after it's processed. Okay. We have receptors that react to sheer stress. For instance, if I push my skin, like I have a receptor that's activated because the skin is being sheared like this. Okay. And it can withstand a certain amount of shear, right? But there's a point where, for instance, the receptors they're at their maximum, and then what happens? Snap, right? Now the cells are broken. Okay. Now the cells are broken. And so all the intracellular, the stuff that was in the cells, now goes extracellular. It now becomes outside the cells. The tissue is now damaged. And now I have other sensations that not only were my stress receptors activated, right? And then something snapped. With the snap, now I have other receptors that are being activated because of the intracellular components and the tissue being damaged, actually ripping blood, et cetera, et cetera. And now I feel my nerve may have been torn or irritated. So now my nerve is buzzing, right? That feels like electricity, right? But my body, my nerve isn't saying pain. My nerve is just saying, right? And you're like, oh man, it feels electrical. Okay. It feels like this sharp sort of electrical feeling. Okay. Good. It feels, burning. It feels aching. All those, we could actually take all those and it'd actually be a neat little study to do, but we could actually take all those and actually try to describe them in terms of what is happening in the body that feels that way, right? Cells are open, whatever it might be. The nerve is irritated and constantly irritated. There's scar tissue in there that's irritating the nerve, or that's constantly, it's not allowing the tissue to glide smoothly. And so every time we move it, the scar tissue is actually shearing some of the cells, but the cells aren't damaging themselves. They just are getting sheared, but we feel it, right? There's a sensation that's perceived by that, right? And then, right, so now we get the sensation, right? Because have you ever put your hand over a burning stove and taken it off and looked at your hand and there's no damage, right? You're like, oh, I took my hand off before tissue damage actually occurred. But then there's other times where, for instance, you left your hand on a burning stove and you just was there for too long and oh man, that looks bad, right? You got a burn across and you're like, that skin is going to fall off, and it feels like a burn, right? It's just okay. That's when damage happens. Okay. The concept of pain, right, actually happens when the signal gets to the brain and it's processed. So that actually happens when the signal gets to the brain and it's processed. And as we've talked about numerous times, that signal doesn't just go to one area of the brain. That signal, when it comes up and it's burning or stabbing or piercing or electric or whatever it might be, that goes to like 13 different areas of the brain. A lot of those are also processing emotions, memory, a lot of like basic functions. I need to plan and problem solve, the prefrontal cortex, insula with emotions and trying to figure out what happened. And because when you burn yourself, even when you burn yourself, there's an emotion that probably arises. And that emotion arises because that signal from the burn goes to the amygdala or the insula or the anterior cingulate cortex, all these areas that are really responsible for processing emotion. It also goes to my hippocampus, which is trying to form a memory, which is telling myself, you idiot, why did you do that for the 10th time? Right? Didn't you learn by now not to put your hand on a burning stove? I know you think your hand is small enough to go into that oven, but every time you go into that oven, you doofus, right? You always nick the top of the oven. You're right. When am I going to learn, right? It goes to it goes to the hippocampus, right? Because, why? Because that signal, believe it or not, I think the signal actually has some sort of, it's got like a force to it, an entity presence to it, and it wants me to live and survive. And so it's telling me, hey, look, let's try not doing that again. Okay. You burnt yourself. This is the 10th time you burnt yourself. And you keep on thinking that your hand is small enough to go into the oven, but it's not. So put a glove on or take the stuff out of the oven instead of sticking your hand in the oven, right? That's actually what's happening. That's what's happening with the burn. Instantaneously. It's like you burned yourself and already I'm thinking how much of a doofus I am that I burnt myself again and how I'm an idiot, right? And so the burn, right? The burn from the sensation of the burning is actually being processed in my brain as I'm an idiot. Now my experience of the burn is, what do I go to my wife and tell her? This sucks. I'm such an idiot. I mean, I am just worthless. I can't even remember that I burnt myself 2 weeks ago and I did it again. Okay. She's like, well, does your hand hurt? I don't know, but I'm such an idiot. My hand's fine, but I'm such an idiot. Right. So now what's your experience? Okay, well, now focus on the burning of your hand. Oh, well, it's just burning. It's okay. It's going to be okay, right? Like, yeah, it hurts. The skin is going to slough off. It's but I don't want to think about that, right? And so what's being processed in the moment after the sensory input comes in from the burn? Wow, that was a lot of stuff. Right? That is what's actually our experience. That's our present moment experience in the time of like, I'm an idiot. This just happened. When am I going to learn? I can never learn anything. Right? And then it's just sort of like, oh my God, what if I'm becoming, what if I have Alzheimer's because I can't learn? Like we were actually, that's the path that we're going on. Right? And you're like, oh my goodness, because I can't learn that I burned my hand, does that mean I'm getting dementia? Right? And then you go down that path. That's pain. There's a sensory experience coming to my brain of a burn. And the burn is very localized, but what am I doing? What am I creating? I'm creating something totally different. Right? We're adding self-interpretation. We're adding judgment. We're adding, self-worth comments in there. We're processing it based on everything that has processed in our life in the past. How our mother or father maybe scolded us when we were burnt, when we touched a hot surface. You're an idiot. Why are you touching the surface? It's hot. And you're like, right? That's still in your memory bank. And all that is coming up. Right? And all I did is I have a sensory experience coming from the burn. Okay. So now essentially, right? So from pain relief, right? What we try to do then is we try to actually kind of go backwards and deconstruct that pathway. How did I get to my final output? What was my final output? Well, let's be honest. My final output was panic and sheer stress, total activation of the whole body, right? So my entire body was activated, not by the sensation of the pain, not by the sensation of the burn on my hand, but by what? By everything that happened afterwards, right? By all the thoughts and emotions and processing and all that stuff. Then my experience emerged. And then I went into sheer panic, let's say. And now I'm worried that I had dementia. So what happens to my whole body? It tenses, right? Now it goes into sympathetic overdrive. All right, so now everything that we learned about the sympathetic nervous system, right, and activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, everything was activated with the sympathetic nervous system through me simply burning my hand on the oven. right? So we need to. So what we do is we need to deconstruct that, sort of come back through that. Okay. There's many times that I hear quotes, and I'm sort of like, that guy's just BSing. Like there's absolutely no way that could be, that could be true. And then there's this other part that's sort of like, oh well, I mean, could it be? Right? Could there be? It's kind of going back to like keeping that beginner's mind, right? Or the option open. If the option isn't open in the first place, then it could never be. But if the option is slightly open, even though it's like, the guy's just trying to sell a book, like he just needs to, he needs to keep his mansion funded. So of course he's going to put quotes that bring hope to people and stuff like that, right? This is a pretty common quote that is heard a lot in mindfulness communities, meditation, pain management, and stuff like that, which is pain may be unavoidable at times, but suffering, which depends on how we choose to relate to pain, is optional. And so there's this, kind of like looking at the pain as just the sensory input, and then the suffering, which is what our mind constructs around the pain, around the sensory input, that becomes the story, that becomes the suffering. Okay. And then in the back of the book, he says, pain, especially chronic pain, which you might sometimes feel as your worst enemy, has the potential to eventually become your teacher and ultimately your ally and your friend if you learn to listen deeply to it. So that's like, I think the first time I would read that, I would probably throw this book against the wall. Be like, no. Listen to my pain. What in the world are you? Throw this book against the wall, right? You're just trying to fund your nice suits. Okay, and then I'd be like, what does that mean to listen to my pain? Right? It's almost like something like, that's not something I really want to do. So that's kind of what we're going to get into. Okay, so the first one, so we're going to go through that. We're going to go through his book. It might take a few weeks, but we are going to do it. I feel like not only is, he's probably considered one of the grandfathers of meditation, mindfulness in the Western world, definitely in the US. And so, when the grandfather, writes, might as well, let's just like kind of go through it together. Right? We're all experiencing chronic pain. We're all feeling it. And so it's sort of like, okay, how can we put this to use? And do we feel, and sort of see like, do we feel like these quotes are adequate representations of us, right? Because we're using it. We have to use it. Right? So we're like, okay, we got medications. We're trying to decrease our medication. Okay. This is where it's sort of like, I want to throw this book against the wall, but I also want to kind of be open to it and be like, let's listen to what Jon Kabat-Zinn has to say and put it into use, because given he started his own practice in the 60s and 70s, he's much wiser than I am. And so therefore, let's sort of let's give it a shot, right? Let's give it a shot. All right. So let's go into our practice. I'm going to use his meditations. So the language that I use is obviously going to be different, right? This is his language, not mine. But I feel like just kind of being authentic to his recommendations would be good. All right, so let's find a comfortable posture. Closing your eyes if you feel comfortable closing your eyes. Taking 2 or 3 deep breaths and bringing yourself to the present moment as best you can. If you can, allowing your attention to drop underneath my words to the experience in yourself that the words are pointing to. Whether you are sitting or lying down on your back or in any other posture, allowing your attention to slowly and gently focus on the breath sensations in the body. Approaching the breath as you might approach a shy animal sunning itself on a log in a forest clearing, ever so quietly and gently with the lightest of touches. In this way, you are letting the process of breathing unfold on its own without any interference as you tune into it. Simply embracing in awareness the sensations associated with the body breathing. Feeling the full duration of the breath coming into the body and the full duration of the breath leaving the body. Moment by moment and breath by breath as you sit here or lie here. Notice where you are experiencing the breath sensations most vividly in your body. Is it at the nostrils, in your belly, your chest, the entirety of your body? Invite your attention to focus on the region where the breath sensations are most vivid and linger here. As best you can, riding the waves of your own breathing as if your attention were a leaf floating on gently lapping waves on a lake. Feeling the full duration of the breath coming into the body and the full duration of the breath leaving the body, moment by moment, breath by breath. This is not an invitation to think about your breathing, but rather to sense and feel the body breathing. Simply stay in touch as best you can with the sensation in the body as your breath comes in and as your breath goes out. That is all. And again, as best you can, sustaining your attention on the breath sensations moment by moment. There is no other assignment. You are just experiencing this aspect of your life unfolding in the only moment you ever have, namely this one. And to be explicit about it, experiencing in this case means feeling the breath sensations, not thinking about them. Seeing if you can take up residency, so to speak, in your awareness of the breath flowing in and out, moment by moment and breath by breath. Allowing the breath sensations within the body to be recognized to whatever degree might be possible. Experiment with resting in awareness itself as you feature the breath sensations, whatever they may be, center stage in the field of awareness, and let everything else, sounds and other sensations in the body, even thoughts, flitting through the mind, dwelling here as comfortably as you can in the boundless spaciousness of awareness itself. Sooner or later, you will notice that your attention isn't on the breath anymore. This is absolutely guaranteed to happen. Your mind will have wandered off, no matter how much you intended for it to stay present. When you discover that the breath is long gone from your awareness, simply note what is on your mind in that moment. Then gently allow whatever it is to be seen and known and recognized as a sensation, a thought, an emotion, a memory, a desire, a melodrama, without judging either it or yourself, and without either pushing it away or pursuing it. Instead, the instruction is to gently bring your attention back to the sensation of the body breathing and feature it once again center stage in the field of your awareness. And if you find that the mind has an incredibly strong tendency to wander, to be all over the place, then every time you notice that it is caught up in a thought stream in one way or another, apply the exact same instruction. Be aware of what is on your mind. Whatever arises, simply recognize it, then let it be, and let it go as you intentionally escort your attention back to its primary chosen object, the sensation of breathing. We practice in this way over and over and over again. You can't go wrong as long as you come back to awareness over and over and over again, to just this moment as it is, to just this breath, to just this sitting here or lying here, to just this resting in the domain of being, or inhabiting your life and your body with full awareness. So resting in awareness, breath by breath and moment by moment, and returning to the breath sensations over and over again as best you can, with a degree of kindness toward yourself. Each time you realize that your attention is no longer on the breath and you see what is presently on your mind, it helps to approach the meditation practice as an act of sanity, an act of love. We practice in this way over and over again. And with that, opening our eyes if our eyes were closed, reorienting yourself to your room, and just taking a moment to reflect on your practice.